Good Wednesday, everyone. Welcome to the Blue Water Climate Control Volquest.com podcast. Our season rewind of the 2019 season continues. Again, you can check out Blue Water Climate Control at bluewaterclimatecontrol.com, and you can check them out at blue H2O_climate if you want to check them out on Twitter. That's Blue Water Climate Control. Let's talk about this next game in the series that we're doing here. That's the Tennessee-Georgia game. Tennessee coming off, Jesse, that Florida loss, which was just ugly and uncompetitive, and they have this meeting afterwards, and then here Tennessee comes out to play Georgia, and they find themselves in the lead in this football game in the first half. Why did it go so well for Tennessee, you think, to start this game?
Well, and I wrote this after the fact that not all lopsided losses are equal, and the biggest thing is that Tennessee showed that they had some life, that they didn't lay down. And while ultimately the scoreboard was not completely indicative of their performance at the end, they were feisty. And they were feisty mainly for the first 30 minutes. Now, the third quarter's ugly. You rewatch, this is an ugly third quarter. The score probably could have been worse when you look at the fact that Tennessee got so many stops in the red zone. But, Maurer hits the bomb pass, and you guys can speak to this. That was probably the loudest Neyland's been, I think, since 2016 when that pass to Callaway had the touchdown. I mean, Neyland exploded. The fact that there was that many fans in the stadium to begin with, this fan base continued to support this program with such vigor. They go crazy. You get a couple stops again where Georgia's kicking field goals, and you get another touchdown on the seed to Jauan. The team showed life, and that was when I think a lot of folks fell in love with Maurer. You go to the third quarter, and you see some of the problems when Georgia adjusts a little bit and starts playing much more man coverage. But it was interesting in the moment, and then rewatching it again, that knowing what we know, obviously how it plays out, also what happened just 2 weeks prior, that the team wasn't completely dead, and I joked about the Miracle Max deal in my piece afterwards, but there is a difference between being almost dead and totally dead, and they were not completely lifeless, which then the reason they weren't, we saw what happened the rest of the season.
Austin, it's easy to fall in love if you're a Tennessee fan with Brian Maurer for the first 20 minutes of this football game. I mean, you look at the last 2 minutes of the first half for Tennessee was really bad. That's where the game got away from. They weren't going to upset Georgia, but that game, the score at the half should have been a different score. But for a quarter and a half or so of football, everybody's like, okay, this is the Jim Chaney offense. Here's what's supposed to happen. It's very easy to fall in love with Brian Maurer when you rewatch the first half of that game.
Well, sure. I mean, I think everybody fell in love, as Jesse said, with the deep ball to Callaway. He throws a seed to Jauan on the second touchdown. But you also go back to some throws he made on that second touchdown drive. He threw off the back foot a couple of times. One time he threw one kind of a little jump ball over there to the left to Callaway. It showed again, he's a true freshman. So I mean, he's going to have some mistakes. He's going to have some bad mechanics. But again, people at that point looking for anything coming off of the losses to Georgia State and BYU, just gravitated towards it. And he had high-fived everybody on the ball walk and got them all feeling good. But then he takes that shot late in the game, and I think that rattled him. I don't think he would ever admit that, but I think that really, really spooked him a good bit because, there's a difference between getting hit in high school and getting hit the way he got hit late in that game when he basically got Goldberg speared, into next week. So, Tennessee at this game showed the signs of life, as Jesse talked about. But, Brent, it also goes back to me to just show how far Tennessee still has to go to be on that level, of Alabama, to be on that level of Georgia. Because Georgia, while, ended up leading by, 12 at halftime, and, you can debate how the last couple of minutes just showed, hey, when Georgia gets an opportunity, they take advantage of it. And they also made things look easy for a good portion of the game. When they needed something, they truly could get it. Whereas Tennessee seemed like they had to play perfect football to stay in the game with Georgia.
Yeah, I mean, really spinning this forward, that's a great point, AP, because when you spin this forward for 2020, probably the biggest concern when you rewatch this game is Tennessee's inability to pressure the quarterback unless they're sending an edge rusher. I mean, an extra blitzer.
Right.
You know, when they're just rushing 4 or even rushing 5, Fromm had all day to throw in this game. And even though Georgia wasn't ripping off long runs, they were steadily gaining 5, 6, 7, 8 yards a pop, that 4th and 1 stop notwithstanding. So while the defensive line the week prior when we reviewed the Florida game, you saw some of the promise that they showed the rest of the season. This game, you know, who's gonna get to the quarterback for Tennessee in 2020? This game shows you DT was kind of an invisible man in this game. Kayvon Bennett hardly played. You know, Crouch, who we now think is going to play a lot of inside linebacker, was actually playing a lot of outside linebacker in this game. That's one of the bigger concerns. You know, that big play that Fromm had to Swift on the wheel route. I mean, that was that was his 5th read. He had enough time to go 5 reads.
He had all day.
Five. I mean, and that's on a 3rd down.
Right.
And so that I think is going to be one of the biggest question marks for Tennessee in 2020 is who can get to the quarterback.
I don't think there's any doubt, which is why we've talked about in other podcasts. I think it was on a Mailbag podcast. I contend it may be an inside linebacker that has the most sacks of this defensive front because they're going to have to blitz a bunch, or it may be a Schamberger or somebody coming off the edge. A couple of things that I did take away from this. I thought Wanye Morris, because he was playing against Georgia, I thought Wanye played particularly fast in this game. I thought it was for early in his career. He wasn't great, but I thought he showed some real strides there. They're starting to get a little bit settled on the offensive line, which gives you some positives moving forward into next year with Cade Mays likely to be eligible, but provided they pass all of that in May. So there's some positives there. Great appreciation for Jauan Jennings, just because he shows up every week to play. Here's the thing to me, back to the offense before I get on some defensive things that jumped out to me. Why did Brian Maurer not grow throughout the season based on the success he had in this game? I'm with you also. I think he got spooked and then he got the injury. But Brian Maurer against Indiana in the bowl game is heaving the ball up, into traffic and should have thrown a couple of picks. I wonder why Maurer didn't grow more from this game from a positive standpoint because of the success he had in the first half, Jesse. Or Austin, either one of you jump in.
Jesse, I don't know what you think, but I think when you couple that big hit against Georgia and then subsequently 2 weeks later he gets throttled at Alabama early in that game, I think, again, I mean, I'm not questioning the kid's toughness at all. Let me be the first to say that. But I think when you're not used to being hit that way, the first 1 or 2 times it hits you, it could really rattle you. That don't mean you're not tough. It just means it takes a minute to shake off the cobwebs and kind of figure out what's going on. So, I mean, I think that really hurt, back-to-back games basically because, against Mississippi State, it was JG, rolling through the back part of that one. So, I think it was back-to-back games pretty much for Maurer where he, took massive hits.
I think that's an element. I also think that there was kind of the combination of it was the perfect storm for his first start, that it's Jim Chaney going up against a defense that he's familiar with. And so he's able to scheme up some early calls that Maurer can just kind of throw freely. Maurer was just gunning it deep in the first half. I mean, he has 5 completions over 20 yards. JG didn't have that many in the first 4 games combined. But then again, the windows start closing in the third quarter, the second half. He doesn't complete a pass in the third quarter. He gets sacked 3 times, has an interception. I just think it was it's almost like in baseball, when a rookie pitcher may go out there for a couple first starts and he's just mowing guys down because the batters aren't used to his wind up or kind of seeing the ball out of his hand. But then once there's more video on film and some familiarity there, the tape's out. I think that ultimately happened to Brian. Now, can he take the next step? We'll see. But because he took those 2 hits and because I think it was kind of the perfect storm in terms of who he was going up against at the beginning. It worked out in his favor for that game because he never looked the same after a couple of those home run passes.
I'll say this: Brent brought up Jauan a minute ago, and I thought the play that symbolizes Jauan, and to me symbolizes why I do think he can, be a factor in the NFL, and that's something you guys are going to talk about in your NFL draft preview coming up tomorrow. Is the play late in the first half? Georgia has just went up 20-14. He finds Callaway on a pass. Then he finds Jauan on this little out. Jauan, who, again, is not a burner,
but he
takes it, cuts it all the way back inside, carries like 14 guys with him. I mean, like that to me was a perfect play that describes Jauan as a player, and that's against a fast Georgia defense. So, I mean, like if you can do that against that defense, to me, you can do that at the NFL level. Where the spacing, in my opinion, sometimes is a lot better.
Well, my last thought offensively, last two thoughts offensively, spinning this forward. Another example in this game of this Tennessee's inability to play complementary football against good teams. It happened against Florida. It happened, even solid teams. I mean, it happened against BYU. If Jarrett could have completed a couple passes when they're running for 1,000 yards, I think we agree they probably win that game. In this game, Maurer has 205 yards in the first half, but Tennessee can't run the ball at all. They finished the game with 50 yards rushing. 40 of those came on the final garbage time drive when they get stopped late. And Eric Gray has one carry in the first half. They have got to figure out this fall. It's not necessarily balance in terms of 50-50, but it's just both kind of elements helping each other, and that does not happen against these better teams in this season. And for Tennessee to take a leap in the 2020, it better happen.
Well, and they've got to find some way to get complementary, to play complementary football, because you think they're going to be able to run it, but who's going to catch it? A year ago, the strength was the wide receivers. Can we get enough complementary play in the run game? The question now is, can they get enough complementary play in the passing game? When you talk about losing Jennings, you're losing Callaway. I mean, you go back to the first part of this season and this game. I mean, Josh Palmer's a non-factor. Now, he came on later in the year and made some plays. Missouri, obviously a big game for him, as we'll talk about in several weeks. But he's not a factor early in the season in this offense. So what do they look like in the passing game moving forward, I think, is a big question. Looking over it on the defensive side, you talked about the fact they couldn't generate a pass rush. Huge question. I still think you go back and look, the safety concerns remain for me with this football team. Nigel played better in this game. You can start to see him coming about, but the combination of trying to figure out what to do with Flowers and what to do with Theo Jackson on the other side was a struggle. They had a hard time, I thought, again, at the safety position. Didn't think angles were great, Jesse. Didn't thought they were out of position. They busted some stuff. That's got to be a question mark you wanted to answer this spring that you can't get the answer to because there's no spring practice. Moving forward, for me, that's a big answer. That's a big question, what they do at that safety spot. I like McCullough, but he's not the most experienced guy in the world back there yet either.
No, and this was we see it again in the Alabama game in a couple weeks. This was a game where Tennessee, they were behind the chains, it seemed like, every time defensively on first and second down. Georgia had a ton of manageable third downs. And when you're not getting pressure off the edge and you have some question marks in the back end, that's why it's hard to get stops and you give up 600 yards. So,
yeah, I agree with you. I think the other thing too is, again, no pressure, which puts no pressure up front. Austin puts a real pressure on your corners. It's taken me 3 weeks to kind of rewatch it. Bryce Thompson's suspension and slow roll back into the season, it took him a while to get back up to speed. He had a hard time in the Florida game coming back in, and I didn't think he played particularly well in this game against Georgia from a coverage standpoint.
No, I mean, he had a couple of moments. He had a play down near the goal line where he batted the ball away. But I think, Jesse, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think he was the one that got lost on the wheel route to Swift. who, by the way, I think is going to be a better pro than he was a college player. He just sets up to be one of those to me. I mean, he was good in college. Don't get me wrong. I mean, he was really good, but I think he could be a guy that, ends up being really, really good at the next level, just with his running style. But yeah, I mean, I think Bryce Thompson, Daniel Batuli. I mean, you look at a couple of guys that, missed those first couple of weeks, and, I mean, that's rough. I mean, because, realistically, it's kind of like Trey. When you look at three members of this football team, Trey, and then the two defensive guys, Batuli and Bryce Thompson, realistically, it took them to October to kind of get into playing shape or have a comfort level out there on the field. I mean, that's both sides of the ball with three big names on your football team. That's a big blow. And then when you take out Emmett Gooden, I'm not saying that that's a reason why Tennessee should have lost to Georgia State or BYU, because it's not. But I do think that it hurt and stunned the growth of this team early on.
And that's something that all these programs possibly could be combating depending on when the season comes back in 2020, because there's just not going to have been the time to get ready.
Oh, no question. Over the course of the next few weeks, we're going to see a shift in this football team. Part of that's a little bit of competition. Part of that's this team learning how to win, young guys improving, playing better complementary football. As you kind of look back on this ugly start, this uncompetitive, and Tennessee was competitive in the first half against Georgia. How impressed are you with the fact that they held this thing together? And I don't just mean Jeremy Pruitt. I mean the program kind of held it together. As you've rewatched the last 5 weeks, and I watched this game again, I understand the notion of 1-6 and why that was so prevalent out there. As you think about it moving forward, how impressed are you with that these guys kind of held together? As Jesse said earlier, Austin, there's a difference between being almost dead and being dead in your football season. This team was on life support in a lot of ways, and they came out on the other end. Pretty impressed with the way this team got through the ugliness of the first fourth or third of the season.
Yeah, I mean, this was the one that, I would call this the defibrillator game, because, I mean, to me, like you had hemorrhaged, you had, flatlined, and then this game through the deep ball to Callaway, even though Maurer would play a very small role in Tennessee's success, with several of those wins later on. I thought his play in that first half, it was defibs, boom, and it woke him up a little bit, boom, and it woke him up a little bit. The game ends up, being a runaway by Georgia late, but to me, it gave him a pulse. And then you started to mend more the following week against Mississippi State, and then Alabama, and then took off from there. So to me, this was, to continue the medical theme, I'm gonna call this the defib game, because I do think this is kind of where Tennessee got a jolt and kind of got restarted.
Well, and I mean it's next week where they officially, I think, are taking off life support, because it's, we joked at the time it was the Butch Jones orphans that kind of saved the day against Mississippi State. And you lose that game, then I do think the season probably comes off, it runs off the track. But they win that game, and suddenly there's at least a plausible path to finishing strong after the Alabama game, which is exactly what they did, because the schedule set itself up for such.
Yeah, again, not a lot of positives ultimately, but when you look at it, probably more positives out of this game than what seemingly was the case at the time.
Yeah, and just one final, just kind of like random thought. I wrote this down in the notes on the rewatch, spinning it forward. We've discussed different O-line possibilities, how it could play out. Cade got a lot of reps in this game as an extra tackle, almost playing like a big tight end for a bunch of different snaps. Again, that could be a role for him if he does not – if Carvin beats him out, or they decide to go right and Calvert on the right side, there are still ways to get one of these extra offensive linemen involved, because Tennessee does not have an obvious number 2 tight end. So just wrote it down. Obviously, he did that for Georgia, but I could see that being a role that he plays or someone plays on Tennessee's offense here in 2020.
Yeah, I think there's no question Jim Chaney's gonna like a jumbo package to help this team run the football and to help this team, manage some things up front without the extra tight end, because they were such a 2 tight end heavy team a year ago, and I think Jim Chaney clearly likes that. Next week things start to get better for this football team. We'll talk about some of those positives, but again, some things coming out of this game that you can learn from about this team, and some things to look at moving forward. But that's going to do it for this rewind edition of the Georgia game. I want to thank our good friends at Blue Water Climate Control for their continued support of the podcast, and want to remind you about their smooth sailing service plan. They offer their clients seasonal inspections, repair discounts, and annual tune-ups for one low annual price or low automatic monthly payment price. Included in that, you never have to pay overtime fees for those weekends or after-hour emergencies. They have a loyalty plan you can find out about. Annual diagnostic testing that includes your ductwork, 10% off parts and labor for any repair that you have. Call them today and ask them about their smooth sailing service plan. You can call Blue Water Climate Control at 865-299-2290. Don't forget to mention Volquest to them. And again, that's Blue Water Climate Control. Check them out on Twitter at Blue H2O_climate, or check them out online at bluewaterclimatecontrol.com. Don't forget, coming up Friday, it's the Volquest.com mailbag podcast. And then next week, we'll continue with our Rocky Top Rewind edition, looking back at some great games. But that's going to do it for this Wednesday installment of the podcast. For Jesse Simonton and Austin Price, I'm Brent Hubbs. Thanks for joining us. Have a great rest of your day, everybody.